You're listening to Trek FM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
Hey everyone, I'm Rod Roddenberry, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Are you taking all these books? I thought I'd take some light reading, in case I got bored.
Hello and welcome to TFM's Books and Comic Show, and I am just one of the hosts here, Matthew Rushing, and so excited to have with me, once again, the one and only, the indomitable Bruce Gibson.
Hey, everybody, how's it going?
I think I heard them say it's going okay.
It's going okay. I'm so glad everybody's doing great. Okay, and if you're not, you will be feeling okay after listening to us tonight.
It's true.
Or this morning, or this afternoon, whatever it is for you at this
whatever
moment.
it is time you're listening, as Riley Blanton would say. So, but
Exactly.
Yeah, we're excited to be back. We've got some news to cover for you. We got a year 5 issue to cover, which is exciting. And then we're going to be diving into Bruce and I thought it would be fun to cover a series that we have not covered yet, which is the Lost Years series. And a pretty, I would say, substantial book, because of just what it was, which was trying to fill in those gaps. So we'll talk about that when we get there. But, of course, make sure before we do anything, make sure you're subscribed to us and following us and liking us everywhere. Subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Review the show on Apple Podcasts. Help people know what you think of the show so they keep finding it. Of course, you can also find us on Twitter at TrekFM or on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. We've got the Listeners Living Discussion Group, the Babel Conference you can join, which is a great place to go if you want to talk to listeners from all over the world. Of course, online at Trek.fm, you can go to the contact section and send Bruce and I an email if you'd like. We'd also like to say a huge thank you to our associate producers through Patreon. We really appreciate the fact that we've got Greg Rozier and Casey Pettitt supporting the network here and the show. And of course, if you like what we're doing here on TFM, make sure you go to patreon.com/TrekFM and see how you can be part of the team. Every little bit helps. But we've got some great contribution levels that you can give at. And honestly, quick tidbit, it's going to be much more effective for you. And you're going to get a lot more for your money when it comes to being a Patreon subscriber, because we've got a lot of stuff that's going to be going behind the paywall. So if you like what we're doing here, make sure that you're supporting us on Patreon so you can get behind that paywall. So, Bruce, we are at issue 20 for year 5, which I thought was fascinating as we're in the news now, because this has something to do with what we're going to talk about a little bit with the Lost Years, in the sense of we go to Vulcan in this episode because there is a tower that shouldn't be there, but is there, but shouldn't be there, and Spock gets transported back in time to the Vulcan Revolution of logic. And so I'm really fascinated with this because what did you think of this issue?
I really like this issue because at first when they go to Vulcan and there's that tower and Spock gets transported to the past, I was just like, okay, we'll see how this plays out. And I like that it did not meet mine or Spock's expectations as to what he would find in Vulcan's past, that the stories that have been passed from generation to generation about Surak and that period of time aren't necessarily the way he's expecting them. The stories have changed some. Things don't play out exactly as Vulcan history has shown. And of course, if you go back into any of our histories and any of our countries or in this world, we'll probably find out that things aren't exactly how they are represented today. And I thought that was a good spin.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that the thing that you pointed out is, I think, a strength, but also I think a terrible weakness for me for this issue, because I'm tired of revisionist history, personally. I'm tired of this thought process that, you know, we have to go back all the time and you know, things that have to get changed around, or, you know, and I think anybody with any sort of brain in their heads knows that, you know, things probably didn't happen exactly like you read in a specific history book, right? But to kind of go back here and see that Spock would be diametrically opposed to Surak was, I think, a bridge too far for me. And I say that because, and I'm really torn by the issue, because there's a part of it which is interesting because, you know, look, logic can be used to logic your way into thinking anything, right? That's the problem with logic is their sole foundation for everything, is that logic is a terrible tool. It doesn't have any other guiding factors to it. There's no virtue or anything that goes along with it. Cold hard logic is cold hard logic, and we kind of see that with the way that they portray Surak here. So I'm really hoping there's something else going on beyond just that thought process, that Surak was maybe not... because the problem that I run into this, if there isn't something else, that it really flies in the face of everything we know about Vulcans and, you know, Surak himself. And from all of Star Trek, right? Like, not just the original series, but like Enterprise, and I mean, like every single part of Star Trek, you know, Surak is known as somebody who's pretty fantastic, right? And so to come into this comic and then try and maybe in 2 issues or maybe 3, who knows, kind of say that isn't the case, I have a real problem with that kind of revisionist history.
I think one of the problems what we have is we're not seeing the whole story. To your point, yeah, this is the first issue of maybe 2 or 3 of the story. So I don't know how that's going to play out.
Right.
It almost feels, and this is towards the end of this issue, where we really see Spock, he does the Vulcan nerve pinch to Surak to take him out because he's against what Surak is doing. What I hope doesn't happen, to your point, is that we find out that Surak actually learns from Spock, and Spock is really the one who creates the philosophy of Surak. And then you have that whole thing where it's like, well, wait, who created this? And didn't Spock learn from Surak, but Surak learns from Spock? You know?
No, I think you're absolutely right. If something like that is what happens here, I will be really disappointed. So it'll be interesting to see if there is not something else that's going on here. Like there's some sort of like time tampering in the first place. You know, like somebody is trying to mess with the time-space continuum and you know, change Vulcans from what we've known them to be to what they kind of want them to be. So that would be much more appreciative for me as a fan and just, you know, reading this comic. Otherwise, yeah, well, I would be really disappointed if we get the whole thing where, no, really it's Spock, you know, so it should really be the philosophy of Spock, not the philosophy of Surak, which was the character who is in, you know, basically just influenced by himself, you know, so
right.
Yeah, that's
well,
that's another bridge too far.
There's a possibility that Surak's going to learn from his mistakes, and that's what we're seeing here. And Spock is just there to witness it and is guiding him, but he would have gotten there eventually anyway without Spock, because that's what would have happened in the original history. Or to your point, if someone is involved in this and is creating this alternate history, and Spock is seeing a different history than what really took place,
right,
there's a common thread through all these issues, and that's Gary 7.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and Gary 7 has something against the Federation.
Mm-hmm.
And so there might be something in here that Gary 7 is involved and changed history or put this device on Vulcan that sends Spock back to have some kind of influence.
Right. Exactly. No, I think you're 100% right. And that's kind of what I was saying, with the whole process of how difficult this is when, we don't have the whole story yet. And so, I'll be really interested to see where this goes because, like I said, right now, as it's sitting, it doesn't sit right for me, and I'm hoping that unease is because of exactly what you said, that we're going to maybe finally get the payoff for, what Gary 7 and ISIS have been doing, to the timeline. And so, because that would be really cool to kind of have this whole 5-year mission thing wrap up with a big, time battle with Gary 7.
Yes, without Q getting involved.
Exactly. No, we've got enough Q coming in Picard. We don't need more Q. So, but no, I'm excited to see where the rest of this goes. So, it is definitely, I think, a controversial issue in the sense that it really kind of like, what? And it does leave you wanting to read the other issues. So, if that's what they're going for, which I'm sure they are, well done.
Yes, and absolutely, we always have to comment on the art. I did enjoy the art of this. The characters like they do as the actors on the TV series. I thought the art was really sharp in this.
Yeah, me too. I thought that this was a good-looking issue all around. So, and especially since we're exploring Vulcan, which we haven't really seen too much of on screen. A little bit in Enterprise, and of course some in the JJ universe. So it's always kind of nice to see Vulcan, and of course seeing Vulcan in the past is really interesting. So, but Bruce, I guess maybe it's time for us to dive into the feature, and we can talk about some lost years.
Yeah, maybe go back to Vulcan's past.
Yeah, possibly. So, Bruce, I'm really interested because I feel like this is a book that you have probably read before.
Oh my, yes I have. This is something I've been waiting to mention here on the show. So, without going too far into this book came out in the summer of 1990. And at this point, I was really, my Star Trek fandom had been growing the last few years, coming up to that period of time. And I went into a bookstore in the mall. Yes, they used to have bookstores in the mall.
Wasn't that crazy? Like, I miss Walden Books in the mall, right?
Yeah, and I think it was a Walden Books, actually. And they had a display at the front. And I missed this too, seeing Star Trek novels in the front as soon as you walk in. And there was a hardcover, several hardcovers of the Lost Years. And I thought, that would be really interesting to read. I've never read a Star Trek novel. I'd like to read it. And I thought, oh, but you know what? Years ago, I bought one called Enterprise, Their First Mission. And I haven't read, or The First Adventure. I haven't read that one. And I'm like, I always get novels and I never finish reading them. I start them and never finish. And I just graduated college. I'm like, you know what? I've got time. I haven't started a job. I'm going to buy this novel, but I'm going to read the first one, Their First Adventure. I'll read that first, and then I'll read The Lost Year. So I'm reading the beginning of the 5-year mission and the end of the 5-year mission. So this was technically the second Star Trek novel I read, but this is the one that made me want to read Star Trek novels, and I haven't stopped ever since.
Man, that's so cool. And it's funny because I was just looking at, Star Trek books the other day and thinking about books we haven't covered, and I was like, man, The First Adventure, I don't think we've ever covered that one here on the show. So there's so many of these that we haven't gotten a chance to get to because there are so many Star Trek books. But this might shock you. I've never read this book. Like, I've seen it like at the library. I remember as a kid, I used to see it at book sales. Of course, I would see it. I'm also a huge fan of the fact that we used to have bookstores and malls that weren't like Barnes and Noble. And, that's what got me into Star Wars books because I saw, Timothy Zahn's Heir to the Empire in the window. I'm like, I have to read that, And, once I was a kid and or when I was a kid and got into Star Trek and Star Wars, used to get the books at the library and stuff. So this is just one that I had never read, but was always fascinated by because of the idea of, kind of filling in the gaps of the 5-year mission to, of course, the motion picture. And to me, it's a really interesting time period because there is so much that happens and there's so much about these characters' lives that seems to change from where we were in the 5-year mission. And so on that, I kind of wanted to probe a little bit with you and see, that's really the whole impetus for this book, which is to fill in the gaps. And so as that being the main thrust of this book, how do you feel it does with that mandate?
Wow, that's a really good question, because I was thinking about this before we started recording. Because honestly, when I started reading this book, I was surprised with how much I didn't remember. Because remember, it's been like over 30 years since I read this book. I haven't read it since the first time I read it until now. That's the lives
of some of our readers right there, our listeners. So,
yeah, I remember back in the day before you were born, there was a Star Trek novel. And that's my old man voice. I guess this is too. But
so we both have old men voices. What are you talking about, Bruce?
I don't know. Pass me some iced tea.
Or a mint julep.
My rocking chair here. Mint julep, yeah. But, I was surprised going through this how, in some ways, how little there is of filling in the gaps. It does fill in the gaps, but it's only maybe like the first third that really plays to that. And then the rest of the story, you really could have worked a story like that into any time period in Kirk's command. You could have, jiggered it a little bit to fit in there. And then until the end, we get a little something that adds to filling in the gap. But it really doesn't fill in it actually plays out as a Star Trek novel. It's just set up to take place at the end of the 5-year mission.
I think you have a really good point there. I think there are some parts to the novel to which try to answer some of the questions, right? You're trying to basically answer questions about our 3 main characters. How does Kirk end up an admiral? How does Spock end up on the path to Kolinar? And how the heck does McCoy end up wearing, really tight pants and a V-neck shirt that goes down to his navel with a massive chain hanging around his neck and a massive beard, So those are the questions we have to answer, because that's the next time that we would see the characters in the motion picture. And I think the novel does answer some of the questions a little bit, but it also takes a very strange road to doing it. Like, I would say this novel was completely unexpected in some of the choices that it makes. And I felt like maybe the best way to kind of break those down was just to talk about our 3 main characters. And then I think we do have a final section to talk about, because it kind of sums up the insanity that I thought this book was. But so with Kirk, the big question is okay, so how do we get Kirk to be an admiral? How do we get Kirk to be at the position where he would actually accept being an admiral in the first place? And I will say this is probably the best answer in the book as to that kind of question of how do you get the character from one place to the next. Because if there was any way that you were going to tempt Kirk off the bridge of a ship, I think they found, Starfleet Command finds the exact right way to do that here in this book.
Yeah, I agree, but I have a little issue with it.
Oh, please,
I like how it. Yeah, I like how it builds towards it. I like the fact that he's saying, "Hey, look, they may want to kick me upstairs. They may want to give me a desk job. They may want to give me a promotion. I don't want that. And we find out that he's already put in to be captain of another ship, at least temporarily until the Enterprise is done with its refit.
Yeah, I think he wants the Victorious.
Back. Yeah, I think that was it. Yeah. And so, and then he's stating to his friends that, if they offer me a promotion and put me behind a desk, I'm going to resign. I'm prepared to make the threat, because he starts finding out that Starfleet needs them. Things haven't been perfect with Starfleet, and they have to, Kirk's their shining star. So they need the shining star. They don't need him leaving Starfleet, and they need to make him happy, but then they have ideas of what they want him to do for them, and it's not being a captain of a starship. But then it takes someone else, and I don't remember, how do you pronounce her name? Sienna, or what? I can't remember.
Yeah, I can't
remember her name
Sienna.
Exactly. Sienna. So she eventually, spoilers or whatever, she eventually, in the motion picture novelization, he's married to her. He eventually marries her.
Interesting. So, okay, that makes sense. I've never read the motion picture novelization, so that makes a lot of sense.
And she's one of the characters that's killed in the transporter accident on the Enterprise.
Oh my, okay. Wow, they don't play that well in the movie at all. Then she's supposed to be his wife.
That's all cut out of the movie. Yeah, that's not in the movie, but yeah, in the novelization. But regardless, she's this vice admiral, and she wants to employ him into this new mission of her going on these diplomatic missions to planets, and he wouldn't be behind a desk, and he would be there to help her and guide her and show her how it's done, and basically all the things he kind of did as a starship captain, but without being a captain, but being an admiral and having more flexibility to do all these things. And it seemed too quick for him to say, okay, that's the problem I had, because he was ready to leave Starfleet. And I guess what I'm trying to say is I wasn't sold on the job. I thought, oh, okay, he's going to be the second banana to this vice admiral on diplomatic missions. I think he wants a little more adventure than being a diplomat. And he was just like, okay, I'll do it. Sounds good.
Yeah. So I can understand that. And I do think, and that's kind of where it's like, I felt like it's the best answer in the book. I
agree.
I don't think it's the best answer necessarily for Kirk, in the sense of really truly making him make the move. And I think it's an interesting idea to basically, what you're offering Kirk is the opportunity to go, gallivanting around the galaxy, saving all the hot spots. You're kind of playing into his ego, that, it's only Jim Kirk that can do this, kind of thing, which I think is helpful. Kirk definitely has, I think, somewhat of an ego. But the thing that they're not doing is that you still can't really replicate the fact of the unknown, right? The whole point of Kirk and being on a starship is the joy of experiencing the unknown, boldly going where no one has gone before, right? And so that's still something that they can't quite do. And I think where the answer is almost good enough is the fact that I don't think Kirk truly means that he wants to resign from Starfleet. And I think they basically call his bluff, and they give him something good enough. And the other reason I would say that is because they also promise him, Nagura promises him, look, if you do this for us, then I will do whatever I have to do to basically get you back the Enterprise. Which does help in the sense that when we talk about the fact that, he did some arm twisting, to get the Enterprise back in the motion picture, it makes sense that he basically would have gone to Nagura and been like, yeah, I'm calling in my favor. And so that's where I felt like when it came to filling in the gaps for Kirk, that was the place where it made sense. And
I think I agree. I like the fact that the Enterprise is that carrot that they put out to him. You're right. I think it would have played a little better for me if she offered him the position. He is attracted to it. He likes it. But he'd still rather be on the starship. but he's really thinking hard about doing it. And then Nogura comes and says, if you do this, I'll give you the Enterprise. And then he goes, sold. But it felt like it was more like he was sold immediately when he heard the position. Yeah. And I just think he would have held back a little more on that.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. And that leads me to something that I felt like was a little bit of a detriment to the novel, which is that he and Sienna fall in love. I was just like, really? Like, Kirk can't not fall in love with somebody? Like, I feel like it's such a bad trope. And part of this is like, yeah, maybe it's because it's an early novel and they feel like you have to have Kirk fall in love with somebody. But I just felt like it was a little bit too much for me. And it was, honestly, it's kind of inappropriate for them to be together anyway in the chain of command. And so, not that Kirk really seems to care about that kind of stuff sometimes, but yeah, to me, that part just did not work. It's not written well enough for me to buy it. And so I was kind of displeased that happened. And you filling in the gaps for me, since I've never read the novelization, okay, that makes sense then. They basically are playing with what the novelization of the motion picture and where they're trying to go. That makes sense then. I just feel like the storyline should have been much better written then, if we're going to have to do that.
I can definitely see that point. I don't disagree with you. I was waiting for them to get together. I was actually waiting for that to happen even a little sooner. I was also expecting that maybe he took this position because his attraction to her. But that didn't play for a while. And then it just happened. You know, they hooked up. But it sat easier with me because knowing that they were probably trying to fit this into the novelization, I'm expecting that they have to get together at some point,
right,
whether it's in this novel or a future novel. And like I said, I don't really remember this novel that well from when I first read it. So it was easier for me to accept it because I knew it was going to happen at some point.
And that's where, to me, I do think it just should have been pushed to a further novel. You know, let them create a relationship together, maybe hint at that they find each other attractive. And I do mean hint, not so obviously as they do in the book. But yeah, I think that would have just sat better with me as a reader, to know that, okay, that's the possibility of where we're going, but I don't know if that's for sure. And just, it just kind of felt like one of those things where, Kirk has to fall in love in a Star Trek story. You know, Kirk has to have a lady, and it just didn't feel as earned for me, with the way that they tell the story. Like you said, it's just kind of like they finally admit they're attracted to each other, and he kisses her, and it's just like, it's so melodramatic. It just wasn't well written for me.
But I also didn't take it as that they were in love with each other or really are in much of a relationship. It just felt like they're just fooling around together. It could be that too. Two consenting adults doing the thing that two consenting adults do, beneath the Starfleet sheets. So, let's transition to Spock, because I do think specifically Spock is the character who works the least for me. Spock seems to go through some very strange emotional leaps in logic that I don't understand in this. 1, he gets mad at Jim. 2, he decides to get engaged. And then by the end, he decides that no, he's going to leave everything he knows for Kolinar. And none of it seems to connect really emotionally to me. Or it seems to connect with the Spock that I know from the series. I was disappointed with the Kolinar, because it just didn't. I kept expecting that to really play out, and at the very end of the book, he's going to do Kolinar, because I didn't really understand why. He just decided, well, he just went on this thing that happened, and he had some somewhat emotional moments, and he felt like he needs to suppress all his emotions. Like earlier in the book, I don't remember what they call it, but this colonoscopy or whatever, I don't remember what the word is, but it's like
the colonoscopy, the Vulcan colonoscopy.
Yeah, the colonoscopy. he has to fast for a day before the colonoscopy. Hey, this is old man talk, people. I'm telling
seriously, you. It's important. It's important.
It's important. By the way, I have mine in 2 months. So then, he's around this area where the monks and stuff. So I thought there must be some influence. He must be searching for something, but I really wasn't gathering that. I really wasn't sure why he was there. They didn't really explain that. And then at the end of the book, he decides he's going to do Kolinar and he's not going to get married. And to your point, it's like, why is he going to get married to begin with? Like, he didn't get married to D'Pring, so why now?
He still hasn't found what he's looking for.
Well, that's the point, right? I feel like I don't think it really came across well, but I feel like that's what they were trying to say, is he's just trying to figure out his place.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, so at the beginning, Kirk decides that basically he's fighting for the victorious, and Spock is upset that he hadn't asked for him to be his first officer, and because Kirk has actually put him up for promotion for his own ship, basically, to be a captain, because he believes that and it felt so illogical for Spock to be upset about that, because Spock doesn't feel like a character that would have gotten upset about that from the series, because he would have seen it as the next logical progression. He would have seen Kirk's thought process to be the most logical next progression. And it just seemed very strange. Like, we were taking this character and making him overly emotional, and then, honestly, the whole marriage thing seems to come out of nowhere. And so, all of a sudden, Spock's engaged? That's weird, and it really doesn't come from anything in the story, other than it seems like a plot contrivance to, like, that Spock is going to stay on Vulcan and be a teach at the Vulcan Academy of Science. Okay. And then, by the end, he chooses Kolinar, and it doesn't seem to be well plotted as to the character, and like, I feel like if you were writing this story down, you would have had to start with the thought process. Okay, Spock decides to purge all emotion, and apparently that also means leaving everybody he knows behind, which I don't ever think we got that from anything else, but that's part of what the author creates for Kolinar. And so, what would make him choose that? And none of the things in this book make sense in the first place, but two, none of them make sense as to why they would make him choose to do Kolinar either. So, as per the filling in the gaps for Spock, I think this is an utter failure.
So going back to the whole emotion with Kirk, I didn't take it so much as emotion, but I can see a little bit in there. So I definitely see what you're saying. But it made sense to me that Kirk says, "Oh, I put in for you, Spock, to be promoted to captain, and you have your own starship." And I kind of felt for Spock, because it's like, well, who are you to decide what I should do next? That's not your place, Kirk. So it made sense to me, because Spock is saying, look, it's one thing to be first officer under you, but I was also the science officer. Mm-hmm. And that's what I want to do, is science. I don't want to be in command.
Right.
I want to do research. And Kirk's like, well, yeah, but we're going to put you on a science research vessel. He's like, yeah, but I would be the one commanding the vessel and not doing the science. So that made sense to me. Well, and I could see where he's just a little put off by Kirk on that.
Well, and I think you're absolutely right in the sense that then that's where the characterization of Jim Kirk doesn't play at all. Because Jim would totally pay attention to what Spock wants. That would absolutely be his reaction. Oh gosh, Spock, I had no idea that that's what you want from life. I apologize for being such a jerk. And like, of course I'd love to have you as my first officer on the Victorious if that's what you want. Like, Jim Kirk was never about telling other people what they should do with their own lives, unless, they're on some planet where they don't know any better, right? Like, yeah. But to tell Spock you're absolutely right. I think that's where the failure between the way the characters act in the first place isn't always... it feels incongruous with what we know, again, from the characters from the series.
Okay, so I'll give you that. So, because I remember when I was reading this, when the main three went their separate ways, I felt like it was too easy. Mm-hmm. They were too accommodating to be like, good seeing ya. Maybe I'll see you again someday. Bye-bye. And I thought, is that really what we gather from these characters after 5 years together? Are they not closer than
going
that?
Through
or maybe that comes later in their
life
lives.
and death together? Like, they've literally been through every situation you could possibly be in, and then some.
Yeah, and to your point, I can see maybe Kirk saying, Spock, just so you know, I've, put in for captain of the Victorious, and I would love for you to join me as my first officer. But I don't want to hold you back from your career. There's other opportunities out there. You can be captain of this science vessel, which I think you would be excellent for. And Spock saying, well, Jim, I would prefer to stay as a science officer, so I would like to join you in the Victorious. And then Kirk being like, that's what I want too. But I'm not going to say it. But I'm glad he's because I don't want to take command without Spock there. Because if you think to the motion picture, he wants a Vulcan science officer. And you know what he's really saying is, I really wish Spock were here. And I'm trying to find a replacement for him. So I don't see him pawning Spock off so easily. Go somewhere. No, go. It's been nice working with you, but you need to move on. Take captain of command of that ship. Go. We'll see you. So I get that because I remember that running through my head as I was reading it. Like, this just seems too easy that they're really willing to separate. And they're separated for like 6 months, I think, before they talked again. And when they meet up again, it's like, oh, hi, how are you? What have you been up to? And you just expect them to be closer than that.
No, I could not agree more with you. I think you nailed it on the head that there is this lack of connection between the characters. And what's weird is that they're trying to create that connection, that deep-rooted connection between Spock and Kirk and McCoy, in the sense that Spock would be almost offended that Kirk wouldn't want him with him, right? But then, right, you said it just doesn't make sense that Kirk wouldn't want Spock there. And I think the way you said it is exactly how it would have gone down. Like, because that feels so much more connected to the characters that we saw on screen in that 5-year mission, on TOS. Like, that makes so much more sense as the way in which the interaction should have gone down. And I think it would have been interesting. Again, you could have had it be a misunderstanding where, again, maybe even, Kirk puts him up for the promotion. He's like, Kirk, Spock, I'm putting you up for the promotion because I feel like you deserve it. You've earned it, and I don't want to hold you back. And then he would have been like, well, Captain, and so that just feels so much more legitimate. And it almost felt like they were the way that the author was trying to manufacture the emotion between the characters was just off, like there is serious emotion between especially these three characters with everything they've been through, but it was like adding strange emotions that didn't actually fit with what should be their emotional state.
I would get it if the author took the approach of they've been together for 5 years, but they haven't been apart. And this is the first time that they're going to be apart. And they don't realize how much they mean to each other until after they're apart for a period of time. And now if the book went into that direction where Kirk just readily, waves Spock goodbye, it's been great serving with you, short little tear here and there, but moving on. But then they come to realize that they need each other by the end of the book, that would work for me. Mm-hmm. But that's not really how this plays out. And as we're talking through this, and by the way, I still like the book, but I know we're kind of nitpicking at things here, but what the thing that I think this book should have done, now that we're going through this, is to call it The Lost Years and just focus on these characters and what they're going through emotionally, or not emotionally in Spock, but maybe emotionally, that makes him want to go through Kolinar. Let's play that whole thing out instead of setting up the chess pieces to where they are at this time in their life and then playing a Star Trek adventure for the rest of the book.
Yeah, and in some ways, I do think that is a detriment to the book. Before we hit McCoy, I'll just say, as we're talking about Spock, one of the things that this book does is it has some weird focuses in places, like the fact that we focus it all on Riley. Like, I don't care. Stop focusing on him. Who cares?
I liked Riley,
but what my point was is that the page time that we give him or Uhura or some of the other characters was misused in the sense that this book should have been about this big three, right? And it should have only been about them and their experience of, like, getting called their separate ways and then finding out, like you said, coming back. I think it's much stronger because this book, it kind of loses its focus in some ways. And part of that, I think, is I think it's just a detriment for McCoy because he just doesn't get very much to do. Like, and why he's on this, like, speaking tour with this character named Llewellyn in the first place, I never truly felt like I got in the series or here in the book. And I was really disappointed that he just seems to kind of be a character that I almost feel like the author doesn't really know what to do with him as a character.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that. In a lot of ways there isn't that much development for McCoy. It seems like we have to find a reason to get him to Vulcan so he can criticize Spock, like to have the Spock McCoy dynamic going on and be the everyday man of, like, what's this and what's going on and why is this happening? But I will say what I really enjoyed about the relationship of Spock and McCoy in this is they reveal to each other how much each other means to one another. That McCoy actually realizes that he's missing Spock the most after leaving the Enterprise, and that Spock means more to him than he let on, and vice versa. And I started to wonder if Spock likes McCoy better than Kirk at this point, too, the way it was written. But it was good scenes between the two of them. But, yeah, I don't feel like there was a whole lot of development for McCoy in this.
Yeah, and I think you're right in the sense that the Spock McCoy relationship plays off really well. But the thing that I was disappointed in is that I felt like, from the motion picture, McCoy felt as a character somebody who is very happy with his life as a civilian. Being a doctor, not out doing crazy stuff, Obviously, he was loving the fashion. That was something to where I almost felt like, McCoy was the character who really kind of accepted almost retirement from Starfleet much more comfortably, like that he enjoyed his life on Earth. And so that felt like it would have been a kind of an interesting thing because it's the dichotomy between the other two characters, which is, Kirk wants to be on the starship still, but he has the struggle of what I'm going to do, how am I going to stay in Starfleet and still get to do what I want. Spock is the struggle to figure out who he is, as a character. And to me, McCoy always felt like he was so comfortable in his own skin, he knew exactly what he wanted. He was ready to be on the planet Earth and be a doctor and not be going anywhere, like he was going to enjoy reading on his front porch, seeing patients during the day and having a glass of whiskey at night, like to me, that seems much more, I know that's not exciting, but it does seem much more realistic than him kind of having this. And then the relationship with Dr. Llewellyn, it doesn't really work because there's not enough depth to anything that really happens character-wise and character motivation-wise. And so we try to play with this fact that he's with this woman who is kind of a friend and a partner, you know. Is it going to turn into like a love interest or anything? But we never really get to spend enough time with that storyline for me to really care about the storyline for him and her and if it's going to go anywhere. So I think the biggest issue I'm having with all of these is there's just not, I don't feel like there's just as much thought put into what we're going to put on the page. And we just start putting things on the page, and none of it's really gelling for me.
I think that gets back to what I was saying before. This felt as if the writer's trying to create a Star Trek adventure, but also address the transition from leaving the 5-year mission and moving on to their lives, and trying to do both and setting up the situation so then we can move on with the Star Trek adventure. Because to your point about McCoy seems very happy to be retired and drinking his mint juleps and just hanging out in Georgia or whatever he's doing with his shirt open, or maybe he's at the discotheque. Yeah. But there's a hint of that though at the end of the book, because when Spock's talking about doing Kolinar and explains what that is, McCoy says something along the lines that sounds good to me. I like the idea of being alone somewhere in the woods. Nobody can find me. So I feel like it's leading in that direction, but I don't really understand why he said that, because there's nothing that's leading me to believe in this book that through this adventure and, you know, his kidnapping in a sense and all the stuff he went through, that he was like, I'm tired of this. I'm tired of getting in these situations. You know, I'm tired of risking my life. And maybe throw in something about his daughter that, you know, now he had to, maybe you step in early in the book that he has a chance to spend more time with his daughter. And now he's out on these adventures again, risking his life, doesn't know if he'll see her again. And says at the end of the book, I'm done with this. I don't need to do this anymore. I can spend more time with my daughter. I want to spend more time just by myself and do other things. And then that's why we see the McCoy we see later in the motion picture, who doesn't want to come back to Starfleet until he's drafted, you know? And it's like, again, if you just spent the time with the characters, so it's like almost make this, is this book about the lost years, about the characters, or is this book just a Star Trek adventure that happens after the end of the 5-year mission? And we got the book that is the adventure after a 5-year mission.
Yeah, and in many ways, I think what it is that it can't decide what it wants to be. You're absolutely right. And what it needed to be was a character study. And so, and instead, I'll be honest, we get some crazy Vulcans, and I did not really appreciate this story at all. I did not enjoy this, you know, crazy Vulcan Katra that gets released, and they're trying to give it to the Romulans, and the absolute insanity of the mind powers that they have were ridiculous to me. Like, you know, we know that Vulcans are very strong in their mental abilities, but to be able to like melt somebody with your mind, this went way beyond. Like, the problem with this part of the story is that they made it so over the top that it was unbelievable even for Star Trek. Like, you know, if you had told me that you had a Betazoid that was this powerful, I might believe you, right? Because we already know that they're extremely powerful telepaths. But to say that Vulcans have this ability, and yeah, or, you know, we're melting people's faces off like it's the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. No, this just got into Ludicrousville for me.
It didn't so much for me, because in a lot of ways, a lot of things that we learn about Vulcans in a lot of ways are kind of silly. You know, some are believable, some maybe not so much. I mean, I don't even know how I feel about the whole Katra thing, you know, but we're so used to it, you know, and we've got this idea of our heads what Vulcans can do. And so we accept that. when we get to this, yeah, it goes a little too far then with the whole, like, he can melt the face off somebody. He can melt a person, a Gorn. He can melt a phaser out of someone's hand, whatever it is. My question wasn't it didn't bother me that much. My question was more like, how is this Vulcan from centuries ago? How is this Vulcan able to do this and none hasn't since? Why does this Vulcan have such special powers, and why hasn't anybody been able to replicate that? And so as we're talking through this book, I'm starting to realize more and more there's so many missing pieces. We've got the story, but we don't have every piece that we need for us to feel comfortable with the decisions that were made by the author.
Yeah.
And I need those missing pieces. I need to know why he has this capability, why no one else has been able to do it. Why is this happening? You know?
Yeah. I mean, I why are there no more evil Vulcan mind lords is a great question. And I think part of the answer, if I remember correctly from the book, it is the fact that Surak's teachings are something that helped kind of temper Vulcan's mind abilities, which makes sense. But not Romulans. But not Romulans, exactly. So,
and Romulans were around at this time. This is when they left Vulcan.
And so I think absolutely it just, again, he's gone a bridge too far. Like, the mental abilities of Vulcans being more potent is obviously something we already understand, right? But to go to the point where they can basically control things with their minds, almost, because it really became a force power, almost, right? Like,
yes, it does, yeah.
And I think that was just too much. And so it just didn't work for me. And I think you hit that on the head really well, is that what you were saying about the fact that there's too many missing pieces, and on top of the fact that this book can't decide if it wants to be an adventure story or a character study. You put all three of those things together and you come up with the unholy trinity of just a book that doesn't work the way it's meant to, I think. So, yeah.
Well, it's just like that whole trope that we always hear, even with the Star Trek movies. Every Star Trek movie has to have a villain. Well, yes, except one, and that's the one with the whales. The one that we call the one with the whales.
And then it's humanity that's the villain. So
right. So you always have to have the villain, and instead of just saying, you know what, fans would be really interested to learn what the characters go through after they leave each other and after they leave the Enterprise. And let's make this more of a character story. And let's stay on these characters. I mean, a good example is in the 40th anniversary, it was the Crucible trilogy that David R. George III wrote. I mean, yes, there's some adventure stuff in there, but it's focused so much on the characters. There's not like the first book with McCoy, there's not a whole lot of action that goes on. It's just him living out two lives. And I love that book for that reason, because it's all about McCoy and his life. And it's like, this is a critical point in his life in this book, and we could have really played that out. This book almost would be served better if it wasn't called The Lost Years and was just given some random title. It's just another Star Trek book on the shelf, and you open it up and you go, oh, this is taking place right when the 5-year mission ended. You know?
Yeah.
Where you're not expecting to learn more about them.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Which I guess, I'm really interested then where you're going to land ratings-wise here with The Lost Years.
It's kind of tough because, so this is what happens, Matt. You and I talk, and sometimes I start to like a novel more, and sometimes I like a novel less after really talking through it with you. In this case, I'm starting to like it a little less than I did before, but it does hold a special place in my heart. But I did enjoy the book. I mean, I know it kind of got a little crazy with the Vulcans, but I kind of find that to be fun. And I liked seeing Spock and McCoy, their relationship together, and, you know, the pieces being set up as to what happened at the end of the 5-year mission, where these characters going on. I would have liked to have been a little deeper on that. As I mentioned, there's some missing pieces in here, but I would say that I would give this, 3/5 of a melted Gorn out of a fully melted Gorn.
Wow, that's hilarious. I love that rating. I would say I do kind of hate to say this. This might be one of the worst Star Trek books I've ever read.
Wow.
It's just not very good. And I think that you nailed it. And the reason is that the book doesn't know what it wants to be, and it has too many unanswered questions, too many missing pieces to get us to where the book, this is it. The book makes too many leaps of logic. And
yes.
it doesn't help you in any way to really make those leaps of logic. So, this is 2 out of 5 Kirk embraces, because we all want one of those. But yeah, it was disappointing to me in too many ways, to be able to really, I say recommend it. With all the Star Trek books out there, I think this is not the one that I would recommend for people to pick up. And I think disappointing for me because I was really interested in how it was going to answer these questions. And then it didn't answer any of the questions well. And so I think that's what leads to my disappointment. So
yeah, I would say, though, when I'm thinking back to when I read this, and again, this is the second Star Trek novel I'd ever read, I remember after this reading other Star Trek novels that had come out in the 70s and 80s, and a lot of them I didn't think were very good. So in the back of my mind, I remember The Lost Years at that time as being a pretty good Star Trek novel compared to others I had read. But now, this far much further in the future, having read, 3 decades worth of Star Trek novels, and this doesn't hold up as well as it did then to me.
Mm-hmm. And I think, that is one really interesting thing, and it's one of the things that makes this so fascinating about going back and reading these older books. Do they hold up, right? And so part of that can be like the nostalgia you have for it, the lack of nostalgia for me. But I think it's interesting that we're not too far apart with just kind of how we feel about the novel and whether or not it holds up. And sometimes that's the case, and sometimes it still does. So maybe the next book in the series here of the Lost Years will hold up better.
And, I will say another thing. I felt like the pace of it felt more cinematic, like a movie. That's, for some reason, it felt more like a movie era novel than a original series novel of the TV show.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Well, Bruce, it is always really fun to get together and, talk about Star Trek books and comics. And even though, this didn't really land, I think for both of us in too many ways, it was really fun. I'm glad I finally got a chance to read it and add that to the list of Star Trek books that I've read. And I'm excited because we're going to, as we come back next, we're going to be diving back into the Typhon Pack series with I would say, another interesting book, Rough Piece of Empire. So,
yes. Do we think we'll read the other Lost Years novels?
No, Bruce, definitely I think we'll continue the Lost series novels, and because I'm interested to see where this goes. And just because, the first one didn't quite work out, that doesn't mean that the rest of them couldn't be great. So I'm excited to be able to do that. But if anybody wants to catch up with you and see what else you've got going on, where could they find you?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at Admiral_Rex. You can also find me on Instagram at Admiral Rex. I'm occasionally on the Star Wars Report podcast, and I'm on every episode of the Positively Trek podcast with Dan Gunther. And so weird because we're doing some reviews of the Lost Era novels, and here on Literary Treks we're doing the Lost Years novel. I'm getting lost in what novels I'm reading right now. So that's what I'm up to.
Nice. And of course, you can find me here on the network also doing the 602 Club, which is our general geek show talking about all the fandoms we love, as well as Snyder Cuts there with John Mills talking about everything that Zack Snyder's directed. You can also find me over on The Orb with Chris Jones talking about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. On the Nerd Party Network, wrapping up Owl Post with Drea Kaufman as we had walked through every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time, and doing aggressive negotiations with John Mills over there talking about Star Wars. Well, Bruce, I think I'm going to go get a whiskey with McCoy.
Oh my gosh, that sounds so good right now. I might join you, but until next time, live long
and read on.
What do you call that, light reading? To each his own, number one.